Hi, this is a tutorial video about how to create custom guitar cabinet impulse responses from software cab emulators or amp simulators like Amplitube or Two Notes Wall of Sound, for example. How to create your own impulse responses from those and export them so you can use it in something like a Line 6 Helix or Fractal Axe FX or any device or software that can use impulse responses for guitar cabinets. Now, it's actually more difficult to explain than it is to do. The process itself isn't that difficult. There's several steps involved, but nothing that complicated if you have a basic knowledge of digital recording and audio and how all that works. So I'm going to assume, if you're watching this, that you have an idea how signals are routed and how digital recording operates and plugins and what have you. Now, this is specifically about using Logic Pro on a Mac to do it, and with Helix, but the principles are the same from device to device. You should be able to figure out how to do this on Windows in the same way with, say, Reaper or Cubase or whatever. Or likewise, if you've got an Axe FX or a Head Rush, something like that. Again, the principles are the same. For the purpose of this video, we're talking about Mac running Logic and Helix. Now, I guess the first question that would come up would be, why bother doing this in the first place when there are so many impulse responses you can buy from Redwires and Owenhammer. All these companies are doing really good stuff. I personally like the Celestion, their impulse responses. Loads of them available, so why would you want to do this? The reason I've done this is because I've got cabinets that exist within other software platforms like Amplitube, like Two Notes, Torpedo, Wall of Sound, that don't offer any means of exporting an impulse response to be used in another piece of equipment. So I had to come up with a way of basically creating my own impulse responses from their sounds. That in itself raises a question of copyright. Does this constitute bootlegging or pirating the work of IK Multimedia or Two Notes or whoever? This will need to be tested in a court of law, obviously, but no, this isn't pirating somebody's software. I'm not disassembling or hacking the code of somebody's software to do this. All I'm doing is making a recording of the audio output of one of these pieces of software, whether it be Amplitude or whatever. That's exactly what IK Multimedia did when they modeled a 4x12 cab. They recorded the output through a microphone. I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm just having to use their software as the sound source to create this output. And obviously I'm not creating these to sell or do anything with them. They're for my own personal use. So I don't believe there's any kind of copyright issue here. Now, for a start, there's going to be a few bits of software you need over and above Logic and HX Edit and the obvious software. There are two other bits of software I would recommend you have. One is Audacity, which is a free piece of software you can download from the internet for Mac, and it's basically an audio editor, allow you to get into a WAV file and trim it and edit it and so on. There are other editors available. Audacity happens to be free and very good, so that's the one I'm working with here. I would recommend. The other piece of software we're going to need is the Black Hole virtual audio device, which again is a free download. You can get it for Mac. I think you can get it for Windows as well, but again, we're talking about a Mac here. And what it's for is routing audio internally within the Mac's operating system. So routing audio between Logic and its own impulse response utility, then back to Logic again. So we need this so we can route that audio to various sources. So once you've got the Black Hole audio device downloaded and installed in your system, I would recommend at that point creating an aggregate device. Within your audio settings, you don't absolutely have to, but it does save an awful lot of headaches as you go on. It means you're not having to switch audio devices within Logic when you're going to different stages and so on. I have that set up here. I've called it Helix Plus. You can see that that's Helix Audio plus Black Hole 16 channel audio device, again visually represented there. Now, I'm not going to go into the process of creating an aggregate device in this video. There are plenty of videos on YouTube about how to do that and plenty of articles to Google. So we're going to assume you have an aggregate device and work on that basis. Now, once all that's done, you want to create a project within Logic with one mono audio track. And you can look at the audio preferences within Logic. You can see they're set to Helix Plus. Now, our one track, we've got a few plugins set up here, just over on the left-hand side. We've got Amplitube. I'll explain what I'm doing here, actually. I've got this is just an example. I have a 4x12 cabinet that I designed in Amplitube's cab room. It's a 4x12 cabinet with a mixture of JBL and greenback speakers, basically to copy the early Van Halen cab. So that's running. I've also got a channel EQ, which is basically going to operate as a low cut. Again, that's to save some hassle later on. We've also got Space Designer. That's there purely because that's how we access the impulse response utility that we're going to use to actually create the IRs. It's not switched on as disabled, but it's just there to access the utility. So let's look at the input settings and output settings. So when you're auditioning your sound, the Helix outputs its dry signal on channel 7. So you set the input on this channel to input 7, so that'll monitor your dry guitar signal from the Helix without actually using any of the Helix's own processing on it. That'll run through Amplitube, the EQ, and then we're running from that strip through the stereo out. So you just play your guitar. So here's Amplitube. That's my cabinet that I've set up. Now, I can't play this for you now. I can't let you hear what this sounds like simply because I'm recording from my microphone at the moment. I can't record the audio within this at the same time. Now, so I've set up basic amp and cab here. And this patch would normally have a load of pedals, a load of rack effects and so on. But because I only want to record the cabinet to do this, I have disabled all the rack effects, all the stomp effects. You can't disable the amp. You can't try and do the slot, but you can switch it off. So the only thing affecting the signal is the cabinet at the minute, which you can see here. Now, so assuming you've played your guitar through this, you're happy with the sound you've got, and you've isolated it down to the cabinet, your next step is to open the impulse response utility. Now, this is a bit of a pain because Apple in their wisdom for some reason have buried the impulse utility within the Space Designer plugin. So I have the plugin loaded, but I have it switched off, so it's not actually providing any reverb. Under this menu here, click on that, you'll see Open IR Utility. And that, when you click on it, will open this little program. Now, the first thing it's going to do is ask you for some configuration. We want it set to mono. One speaker position, one mic position, that's all fine, then OK. It will usually load the last thing that you've used. In this case, it's opening the patch within Space Designer. We're not going to use that. We're going to override that and resave it. Now, let's look at some of the channel settings. Oh, sorry, before I go on, I should point out you can, and this is what I've done, you can find the actual impulse response utility app within your apps folder and create a shortcut for it here on the toolbar, which I have done. Makes it an awful lot easier. You're not having to dig out through the Space Designer and so on, but you have to find the app in the first place to do that. If you're doing it regularly, it's worth your while. Anyway, let's look at some of these settings on the impulse response utility. Now, we're using our aggregate device, the Helix Plus. It's at 48 kilohertz. I should point out here now, when you're creating your aggregate device, it will set the sample rate generally to 48 kilohertz through the system. That's important because the Helix only reads 48 kilohertz sample rate impulse responses. I'm not sure about Axe FX or Headrush or any other devices, but the Helix I know only works with 48 kilohertz. You have to make sure the WAV file that you end up with at the end of all this is 48 kilohertz. So we're good there, it's 48 kilohertz. Challenge 1 to 2, that's how we're going to monitor things, or you're going to listen to your speakers if you need to. Muted at the moment. Now, the sweep. When we create an impulse response, it plays a sine wave, like a signal sweep up through the frequencies over a few seconds and through our speaker cab. Now, to get that to route to where we want it to, we need to use it on channel 9. You set the sweep on channel 9. Channels 1 to 8 are the Helix. Channel 9 is the first channel of the black hole virtual audio device. So we're going to play out of channel 9. Then this utility then needs to listen for the signal coming back, the process signal to come back. We're going to listen on channel 11. So we set that here on the input. Now, for that to work with Logic and for that sweep signal to get routed through Amplitube and the EQ, we need to go back. I can close that. We need to go back to Logic and look at the input setting here. We're sending the signal out on channel 9 from the impulse response utility, so we set this input to channel 9. We're listening back on channel 11 with an impulse response utility, so the output from this channel would output mono channel 11. Back to the impulse response utility. What that's done is create a loop where the signal is sent from channel 9 in the impulse response utility into channel 9 on Logic, out of channel 11 on Logic, back in to channel 11 on the impulse response utility. Now, to enable this to record anything, we need to unlock the track, enable record. It says no recording is going to be done. We just press record and that has it ready to go. Now, one more setting over here. You see Reverb Time. Because the impulse response utility is really designed for working with reverbs, we need to take account of this setting here. I'll set that to 1 second, which I believe is the lowest it can go. Now, we're ready to do a sweep, that is record a signal sweep. That's going to make our impulse response. What will happen quite often is that the signal is far too hot coming through. Ideally, we want our level to come out at -12 dB. In about between -12 to -10 will be fine, in that sort of ballpark. Probably find the first time I do this, it's going to be way too hot. So I'm just going to do it and see what we get. Now see, nothing happens for a moment. And then we see the signal. Now, it's important to watch these monitors here as well, but also here. Now, it wants me to save this, so I'm going to call this, let's call it tutorial cab. So you can see it's peaked at 4.2 dB here. Also gives us that information here. We're going to go back to Logic. Click on those just to clear that bit of information. So we're going to want to reduce the output level here from Amplitube. We could do it on this channel strip here. We could do it in the channel EQ. For my purposes, I think I'm going to do it here on the cabinet mixer zone output. So I'm going to take that down maybe to about -6 dB. See what we'll get. This might take a few goes. I might have to edit some trial and error here. So I'll go back to the impulse response utility. I'm going to re-record this, so I'm going to unlock that track, press record again, sweep again. Now, unfortunately, once this peaks, it won't let you reset that monitor, so you have to watch here, this area of the screen, to see what this peaks at. So sweep. You can watch these here. Still peaking, still too loud. So I'm going to have to go back and forth a few times until I've reduced the signal to a more usable level. And I'm going to edit out while I do it. You don't need to watch me doing that back and forth. So after a quick edit there, I have, after quite a bit of back and forth, I found a workable level where it's coming into the impulse response utility at around minus 12 dB. Now, just to clarify, I've set the volumes here on the master, and so on, and the input of Amplitube. I could do it elsewhere. I could do it here. I could do it on the channel EQ. Speaking of which, I want to show you, I've applied a low cut 60 Hz preset on the channel EQ. That's simply to avoid having to do it later, and also soaking up a good bit of my available headroom with low frequencies that you can't hear anyway. But the upshot is that I have got myself a workable signal. Just takes a bit of trial and error. So now I'm ready to re-record this. So I unlock the track, arm the record, then click on sweep. And again, we'll watch the level monitors here to see what the actual signal is. And we'll hit sweep. Again, watch these numbers here. We're peaking at 11.8, minus 11.8 decibels, which is more or less exactly where we want to be. So now we have the waveform. Next step is to hit deconvolve, which is what actually turns this into an impulse response. So I click that, very quickly turns into this. What that sounds like is basically a click, which gives the impulse response loader all the information it needs to get that cab sound. Next step after that, we're almost done, is create setting. I'll keep the name tutorial cab just for our purposes. Click OK. SDIR file created. Okay, it tells you what the location is. We'll show you that in a moment. So that's the bulk of it done. Now just got a little bit of tweaking to do, and that's us. If I open Finder and go to music, these impulse responses, when the impulse utility response creates them, initially go into Audio Music Apps, impulse responses. And you can see tutorial cab SDIR. That's the file we've just created. Now, we're going to leave that file in that location and type it. What we're going to do is copy that file back out to the music folder, and I have a folder here called Custom IRs. Double click in there, right click and paste item. Now, obviously our impulse response loader is going to be able to read an SDIR file. All we have to do is change the extension on that file to a WAV, WAV. This will actually confirm, use WAV. That's that. Now, you could in theory just take this file as it stands into your Helix whatever. But as you can see here, there's quite a bit of dead silence at the start of that, which will lead to kind of a weird kind of latency thing when you're playing. This is where Audacity comes in. We need to use Audacity to trim the start of that. One thing I'll check though before I do anything else is right click Get Info and just double check the sample rate, 48 kilohertz. That's important. Now, let's move this aside. I'm going to open Audacity. Get rid of that file that I had open earlier. Now, double check your project rate here. Make sure that's 48,000 hertz, 48 kilohertz, or we'll have problems. So I'm going to move tutorial cab into here, which opens the file for us. Now within Audacity, again, you can see you've got this bit of silence at the start. I can zoom in and zoom out by holding Command and scrolling. That's zooming in, I want to zoom out a bit more. And what I want to do is trim as much of this off as I can. Right at the start, maybe even a little bit more. Now if I zoom in further, go right to the start of the file, you see it breaks down into these fractions of milliseconds. I'm not actually sure how long that is. You can see here where the signal starts to move, where it starts to, well, the sound actually starts. I try to get that to within 0001. So if I trim off, that's starting at 00033 approximately. So if I go back to about here, highlight, trim, you can see that my signal starts to get moving in around 0.0001. Then I'm going to go File, Export as WAV, Export as WAV, Tutorial Cab. I'm going to keep the same name, Save. Now, warning, a file name, Tutorial Cab already exists. Replace, we do want to replace that, yes. Then, you'll get this dialog will pop up. Artist name, track title. I just put my own name in there. Track title. This is worth filling out for the reason being that the Helix looks at that field and uses that to display the name of the impulse response in HXEdit and on the Helix itself. So it's a good idea to put something sensible in there that you can look at it and know what it is. So I click OK. That's it done. We have created our custom IR. Now, let's see if we can get some sound out of that. So if I'm going to open HXEdit, I've got my Helix rigged up and a guitar plugged in ready to go. I have, this is the path that I'm using for the microphone. You can hear me speaking over. I've got another path purely for guitar, so I'm going to enable that for guitar. I've got an impulse response loaded here. I'm going to change that. What I need to do is import this tutorial cab into here, which I can do very easily by just dragging and dropping it like so. That's number 69. I just changed my cab to number 69. I've no low cut, no high cut. I shouldn't need them because everything was set up beforehand. Level is set at minus 25 dB because these do tend to be that bit louder. So theoretically, if I pick up my guitar right now and bang out a chord, you should hear this cab that we just created. And that's it done. That's a custom impulse response created from third-party software. Now again, it takes much longer to explain than it does to do. In reality, you can do this in less than 5 minutes. Now that specific instance was using Amplitube. I'm going to do another one in the second part of this video, going through the same process, a bit less explanation. We're going to do it using Helix Native and 2 Notes Torpedo Wall of Sound. Okay, so for the second half of this tutorial, I'm going to go through the same process, but this time I'm going to use Torpedo Wall of Sound as my cab emulator that I'm going to try and grab an impulse response from. Again, a note on the copyright, all I'm doing was recording the audio output of this plugin. I'm not disassembling the plugin, I'm not ripping anything off in the plugin. All I'm doing is recording the sound and making my own impulse response from it, so there shouldn't be any copyright issue there. Anyway, similar setup before, but I've got a new project, this time again with a single mono audio track. This time the plugins I've got loaded are Helix Native, just to get my amp sound for auditioning this. Torpedo Waves, so there's Helix Native, just a basic plexi amp set up at the minute. I've got the Torpedo Wall of Sound from 2 Notes, which is a great piece of software, fantastic piece of software. I thoroughly recommend it, particularly with the ability to export your IRs. I would like the designers of the software to have included an IR exporter so I could avoid all this work, but it is what it is. Excellent piece of software though. Again, I got my channel EQ just for a low cut. Again, important. That. And Space Designer, which isn't actually enabled, it's switched off at the minute, but it's there purely so I can access the impulse response utility. Now, what I haven't set correctly is the sound source or the input channel. So I'm just going to double check those. So under Logic Pro X Preferences Audio, yeah, so I already set the Helix Plus, that's just my aggregate device as we discussed earlier. when I'm auditioning these sounds, I want to be input 7 for the Helix's dry signal. Output, stereo output. So this is where you would set up your sound, tweak all your settings. I would go into Torpedo wall of sound, and the cab I have here at the minute is a greenback, Celestian greenback 2x12 cabinet, which I've bought and paid for. I've set it up with 4 mics, so I've got one close mic, one distant mic, both in front of the cab. Then behind the cab, I've got a closer mic behind the cab and a distant mic behind the cab. The core of my sound is coming from this one, the close mic, and these are just adding kind of air and room to the sound, which I find is difficult to do in the Helix, which is why I like using this software to do it. So, assuming I've got everything tweaked up, I've set my sound up as I want, I'm hearing what I want to hear, I can close that down. And as before, go into the Space Designer, go digging for our impulse response utility, which is underneath this menu here. Open IR utility. So again, we're creating a new impulse response. It's mono. One speaker position, one mic position. That's all fine. Okay. Again, we're set to 48 kilohertz. Again, the previous impulse response is loaded by default. So again, as before, we need to look at the signal routing that's going on here. So the sweep is going to play from channel 9 out to logic and listen back on channel 11, which is set here. So we need to set the routing in logic to suit. So we're going to listen on channel 9, input channel 9. I'm going to output to mono channel 11. So if we go back to logic, or back to impulse response utility, sorry, we need to enable our track to record, so we need to unlock arm record. Again, we have to confirm that we want to record. Change this to 1 second, that's the reverb time, to 1 second. As before, we're probably going to wind up with too hot a signal coming out here. Might need to do a bit of back and forth to get it set right. So I've been back and forth a few times. I've wound up having to set the output level quite low and reduce the input level a bit here as well, and the track level here. Just get the signal down so it records between roughly -10 dB and -10 dB. So if I go back to the, I'll clear these monitors here, go back to the impulse response utility, arm this to record again, and I click sweep, and again watch the monitors here. So that has peaked at -11 dB, which is roughly where we want it. So again, we're nearly done. I click on deconvolve, reduces this to basically a click. Create setting. I'm going to keep the name tutorial cab 2. Okay. SAR file created, tells you where it is. Okay. That's just done in that software. We're going to go to the Finder, music, audio music apps, impulse responses, tutorial cab 2 SDIR. I'm going to copy that back to music, my own custom IRs, paste item. Then I want to change the file extension to a WAV file, WAV, use WAV, that's fine. And again, because there's this dead silence at the start of it, I want to go to Audacity, I want to close the previous file I was using. Again, checking that's 48 kilohertz. Move that in. Zoom in on this. Get as much of that away as we can. Zoom in some more till it's the little dots. Again, you can see it's starting to move at just below 0008 there, so I'm going to take it off at just below 007, but there. Zoom in a tiny bit more. Again, let me take a tiny bit more off than that. There we go. So that's starting to move in around 0.0001. Then File, Export as WAV. Tutorial Cal 2, I'll keep that name, save. Yes, I want to replace the file. So, again, artist name, my name, track title. Again, this is what Helix will use to display the name of this particular IR. So I'm going to call it Tutorial Cab 2. Okay, that's us done. Again, proof of concept, we're going to open HX Edit. I'm going to enable this guitar track. Guitar path, I should say. I'm going to import the impulse response by simply dragging and dropping it here. And this patch that I've set up, I'm going to move that to number 70, which is Tutorial Cab 2. I should have something like a Greenback 2x12 cabinet. You can also hear my strings through the microphone as well, but never mind that. So that's how you do it. Again, I would say it takes longer to explain than it actually takes to do. It actually only takes a few minutes in reality to do. But that's the process. I hope that's been helpful. If it was, leave a comment. If you want to ask some questions about it in the comments, I'll try to answer them as best I can. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.